Camping in the yard is a childhood tradition for so many of us. It's easy and seems safer than camping in the middle of the woods. But one listener shares their story today about how their yard campout turned into a living nightmare when a certain wolf-like creature comes running. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails. Today's episode features an assortment of pure terror and true stories of the unknown from real people, such as new werewolf sightings, loved ones from beyond the grave, and phantoms who demand to be heard. I want to narrate your scary stories of the unexplained, so send them to me at darkstories.org. Support Unexplained Encounters by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or you can subscribe to me, Darkness Prevails, on YouTube. If you want to go further beyond, go to eriecast.com/plus and sign up to be a member, and you'll unlock access to members-only horror content, and you'll be able to download and listen without ads. Now, let's begin. I swear, there was something outside my window. From DeAndre128. Let me just preface a few things before we get into the meat of this. I'm currently 21. I used to live with my grandma, but things at the house got too crowded for me. Late last year, my friend and his mom allowed me to stay at their place. I've known them for quite a few years, and I've always been super close with them, so I consider them a second family. Things were going pretty good. I always made sure I wasn't getting in anyone's way, and I kept my things to a small but dedicated area. Now, in 2024, I've been staying there for a little over 6 months, and I started to get feelings for a friend who I've known for about a year at this point. It turns out she also had these feelings, so things started getting a little bit more serious, and we officially started to date. She lived about 24 hours away from me, so we started to make plans to visit each other. She said she'd prefer to fly to me because she wasn't sure her parents would be on board with us yet. So she told them it was just a visit to a friend. However, if that was going to happen, I wasn't too keen on the idea of having her stay in the living room of a friend's house with me. So I immediately started scouring for my first ever place. Cut to about the middle of May. We discussed her visiting in the middle of June, just a month from this point. I managed to find a place online, and I was liking everything about what I was seeing. It was a basement studio apartment. It had decent rent, all utilities included, and it seemed to have more than enough space for my game consoles and collection. So I immediately applied. My application was approved, and they told me I could move in on June 1st. June arrives and I start getting moved in. Things are going well. There were a few oddities with the unit, but ultimately, it was incredibly nice to have my own space. It was quite a different feeling knowing nobody's there with me, but it was a trade-off I'm more than okay with. My girlfriend and I started finalizing her visit. We decided she was going to visit June 17th through the 21st. Honestly, things couldn't be looking better. We purchased her tickets, and my mom said she was willing to bring me to the airport to pick her up. Now all we had to do was wait. Then it was the day. It was about 2 a.m., and my mom and I were leaving for the airport at around 7 a.m. I couldn't sleep because I was too excited to finally see her. During this time, it starts to storm, and personally, I'm a big fan of storms. I always found them cozy. After a long enough time of just lying down watching YouTube, I decided I'd kill some time. So I grabbed my Steam Deck and started to play a game. Shortly after turning it on, I hear some tapping at the window. Again, I live in a basement unit, so I have an egress window, and my bed is laid right in front of it. I figured it was just the storm, since it's gotten pretty windy at this point. So I continued playing. As time goes on, the tapping is very frequent and almost deliberate. Then it sounds like something was trying to open the outside window. Now, obviously, I have blinds, so I can't see out there. Things are getting a little disturbing for me. I texted my girlfriend to hopefully ease my nerves. I think I'm hallucinating or something. I think something's outside my window. It almost sounded like it was trying to open it. What if it is someone? If it really is, they wouldn't have been here just sitting for nearly 3 hours, right? Maybe I'm just hearing things. I decided that maybe I was just nervous to meet her, and these were the side effects. I wasn't too sure, but I decided maybe I should turn off my Steam Deck and try to get some rest. I got maybe an hour of sleep and woke up, unable to go back to sleep. I listened and didn't hear the tapping or anything out my window anymore, so I decided to once again pick up my Steam Deck and play something. Less than 2 minutes in, it starts happening again. Tap, 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 tap. This is starting to really freak me out. There was absolutely nothing for the hour I was just trying to sleep. So what was going on? I decided to test if there was really something there. I turned off the screen, waited for about 5 minutes. No taps. I turned it back on, and the tapping started again. Now I was certain this wasn't just a tree branch or an animal. There was something more out there. I decided to slowly slide off my bed, go to my chair across the room, try to call a friend. I'd feel much safer checking things out if I was on the phone with someone who lived nearby. Unfortunately, no one was up. I tried my mom and my grandma too, but nobody was picking up. I sat there for about half an hour, processing what I should do. Should I really call the police? If it is just an animal, I'd feel incredibly guilty for wasting their time. I decided maybe it is just all a crazy coincidence, and I went to lay back down, not playing anything this time. But then I heard movement. Not the type of movement from a rabbit or squirrel or anything like that. This felt heavy. I backed away again, sliding off my bed, except this time, the sun was starting to rise, revealing a shadow. By this point, the wind was already dying down, so all the movement out there was from that, whatever it was. A bit of time passed, so I tried calling a few people again. This time my grandma picks up. Thank goodness. Grandma, I think there's someone outside my window. I see a shadow moving about out there, I told her. It's okay, take a deep breath and call 911. And call me back as soon as you can, okay? Okay, Grandma, I'll do that. I hung up and immediately dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Hello, I think there might be someone trespassing in my backyard right outside my window. Okay, stay calm. What's your name and address? I proceeded to tell her the information. Okay, we're sending 2 officers there. Just remain on the line and stay calm, she replied. During the wait, I saw the movement getting more frantic. I was starting to panic. Eventually, the officers made it, and I told them my window was just around back. The officers went and searched the area. They eventually came back to me and told me that they couldn't find anything. As a matter of fact, there were absolutely no footprints of any kind near my window. Are you kidding me? I thought. Everything felt too coincidental for it to just be a branch or something. I called my grandma back, telling her what the police had told me. She said maybe some drunk had stumbled his way into my egress window. Regardless, the whole fiasco was over. My mom and I left about 15 minutes after the cops came, and we went to go pick up my girlfriend. Thankfully, we had an amazing time, and nothing like that happened again while she visited. In fact, it never happened again, period. But to this day, I think about it. What would I have seen if I had just opened my blinds? Would I even be alive? I'm honestly not too sure, but I can assure you, there was definitely something outside my window. My dear friend Raylyn. From It's Peyton 101. In 4th grade, I met my best friend, Raylyn. We instantly became close. When high school rolled around, everyone thought we were together, although we weren't. We did everything together, and absolutely could not be separated. Those were the good old times, when he was still alive. We were best friends until we were 24, about 3 years ago. One day we were hanging out at his place, and we heard the window shatter into 1,000 pieces. He insisted I stay in his room while he went to check it out. Not even a minute later, I heard gunshots, and I knew for a fact that he didn't own a gun. I came running into the living room, only to see nothing but Raylyn's practically lifeless body on the floor, lying in a pool of his own blood. I remember screaming. Instantly, I ran to him, praying that he wouldn't be dead. I could barely see him breathing, if I did at all. I called an ambulance and the police, begging them to hurry, desperate not to lose my best friend. I was also enraged at what the intruder did. Someone had shot Raylyn. Someone had tried to kill him. And for what reason? The police and ambulance came as fast as they could. Raylyn was rushed to the hospital. The police searched and searched, but just couldn't find the intruder who shot Raylyn. I'm so deeply mad, even still, that they couldn't find him. I don't know why he had to be killed, why that person did it, and I'll never forgive them for what they did. This happened a while back, but I still miss him so very much. When Raylyn was in the hospital, barely able to move, he was able to tell me something.
I wish things didn't happen this way. I'm sorry, Peyton. Don't forget about me. I swear on my life I'll never forget you,
I told him through sniffles, alongside tears and a shaky voice. He gave me his favorite necklace, so a part of him could stick with me forever. I still wear it, and I rarely take it off. Raylyn was my everything, so it felt like a part of me fell apart when he passed. Around a year later, I was at home alone. I don't remember what I was doing, though. Suddenly, I heard my front door open up. I went to go check it out, but oddly enough, the door was still shut. I was confused. How had I heard it open, but never heard it shut? I put it to the back of my mind. Maybe I was hearing things. I'd had a long and stressful week, so I needed a breather. I decided I wanted to get out of the house, and I chose Starbucks as my destination. I only remember this small detail because of what happened. After I got my order, I went back to my car and drank my coffee there. Suddenly, I began to hear tapping on my passenger side window. I looked over, but I didn't see anyone. Then I turned back to look in front of me, and I could have sworn I saw this figure. A figure that looked exactly like Raylyn. He was there for a brief second and gone the next, but I swear to God, I saw my best friend. It didn't scare me. I smiled at the fact that I was able to see him again, even though it was so brief. I went back home soon after, smiling ear to ear all the way back. It was getting a little late, probably around 6:30, so I made some dinner. I wanted to make Raylyn's favorite meal, and so I did. Shrimp Alfredo. He loved it so much, so just eating it made me tear up a little. While eating, I swear I heard a voice that sounded like Raylyn, and to me it sounded like,
I know you saw me. I miss you too, Peyton.
I told my parents about it soon after dinner, and even they were happy about it. They also loved Raylyn when he was alive. This whole experience made me quite happy, as I've missed him so much. Since then, I've seen him for a quick second in various places. Although this is quite a short experience, it sure gave me joy in a way. I'm glad I was able to see my best friend Raylyn once more. Werewolf encounter in a remote neighborhood. From Anonymous 419. This story started when my best friend E first moved into her new house. She invited me over before school started again, so around late August. We planned to sleep outside in a large tent that could fit up to 20-ish people, in a little clearing in her backyard. Mind you, she had a really big backyard. We were enjoying the day, exploring and swimming, eating a bunch of junk food. It was getting dark, and we, alongside her parents and grandmother, went to start a bonfire in the fire pit. We collectively went searching for twigs and sticks. We soon came back with a big pile of sticks and twigs. When it was completely dark, we had a large fire going, and E and I were making s'mores. Soon enough, her grandmother left, and her parents went inside for the night, leading us to have to go to the tent. Of course, we didn't go straight to bed, since that would be boring. So we played some games and ate more snacks. We were casually being silly when all of a sudden, we heard twigs snapping. We shook it off as a nocturnal animal of some sort, then went back to playing our games. Not even 2 minutes later, we heard footsteps, but they were practically running. The closer they got, the more we realized this was not an ordinary animal. These were very heavy. It sounded like they had come from the roadside, due to them being so extremely close to us. We were shaking, scared out of our minds, but then we heard it run past our tent. Then we were confused and scared. Now, we'd been pretty careful to make sure that we didn't leave anything out from previous activities outside the tent, so we didn't quite know why this animal was in a rush over in that direction. We had a small window that we could look out of, but we weren't too sure if we were going to be able to see a whole bunch, due to where our tent was set up. And yes, just like we thought, we weren't able to see much. But what we did see was a tall and furry creature, standing in the motion-activated lights that my friend had installed on the front porch. It was around 6.5 feet tall, bending down to fit through the roof of the porch. It had what appeared to be black fur, almost as dark as the night itself. We stared at the thing for a solid few minutes before it finally noticed us. It stared back before we could duck out of the way. Those eyes looking at me will forever haunt my mind. They were bright blue, like we were staring into an open sky. After it had noticed us, it didn't run towards us, but instead began to run away from us to the road. We were horrified, and we planned on going back inside. E and I didn't instantly go in, since we were still as shaken as ever. We went in an hour and a half later, when we knew it would be safe. We just covered E's window and tried to get some sleep. We didn't say anything or try to wake up her parents, since we didn't want to wake them up for a story that they probably wouldn't believe. Instead, we waited until the morning, and just as we expected, they didn't believe a word of it. I was thankful I had plans with my brother that day, so I wouldn't have to witness that creature again. Though, only 1 week later, my friend saw those same bright blue eyes staring at her through her window. I don't care if anyone believes this story or not. From what I know, this world is not what you might expect. What can I say? Just know you may not be a believer in things like this until it finally happens to you. Expect it when you would least expect it. Thank you for listening. It knocked on our doors on Christmas Eve. From Marshall Skeleton. I'm about to tell you about a horrifying encounter that began one foggy Christmas Eve when Santa did not come down the chimney, but instead, something else did. At the time, my aunt was staying with us. She reported that she heard someone trying to break into her basement around 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve. She said that she thought someone had used the bathroom, and at first she thought it was one of us. But we all denied this at breakfast. We includes my sister, husband, and I. Auntie said that the person trying to break into her room rattled her door handle and tried to walk over to her bed, scaring her to the core. We all laughed, saying maybe it was Santa, due to the date of the alleged break-in, which was Christmas Eve. My mother also read that Christmas Eve is a common time for break-ins, due to all the valuable gifts lying about. My aunt said it definitely wasn't Santa, and that the person trying to break into her room was neither jolly nor fat, but was in fact a woman. My aunt said that there was a faint smell of rosewater oil and stale flowers on the veil of the person trying to break into her room, a visitor from beyond the grave. Wait a minute, I thought. The figure was wearing a bridal veil? How macabre. To witness a spectral figure wearing a wispy veil laden with freshly dug earth and smelling of graveyard flowers, trying to enter your room in the middle of the night. Nevertheless, I dismissed Auntie's words as the superstitions of an older woman. The next night, following Christmas, I awoke at the witching hour, just like my aunt had. I looked over at my red digital alarm clock that read 1 a.m. Usually I don't wake up at this time, unless I've been roused from deep sleep by a noise or something. This time, something had definitely awoke me. I heard my door handle rattling, as if someone was trying to force themselves in. And then I heard a group of voices, multiple voices, a male and a female.
Should we break it? Quick, grab the handle.
The male and female voice whispered to each other. From my bed in the dark, I was terrified. I pulled the covers up over my face. I prayed that these people would not come in, assuming it might be related to what my aunt had seen. The door handle rattled loudly one more time, and I could actually see it moving and twisting there. But then the figures disappeared, and everything went quiet. The odd part about this is that my door wasn't even locked, so they, whoever they were, could have come in if they really wanted to. The next day, my mom, concerned and encouraged by our stories of what appeared to be a break-in to her, called the local police, asking if they had heard of a string of thefts in the area on Christmas Eve. The police said that they hadn't heard of any residential break-ins occurring in the area. Of course, this makes me wonder, who were they? These figures or entities who rattled doorknobs and whispered to each other in the black of night on Christmas Eve. You'd think it was a holy night, right? Or is the night open for strange things like this to come in? My mom did agree to contact a spiritualist who had been to our house before. A smudge session and cleansing was conducted. The spiritualist said the place had had a very dark energy, Christmas Eve or not. There's a Skinwalker in the forest. From ZYNX. Before I begin this story, I want to say that this has been my first encounter with anything paranormal, and I live in central Czechia. Please correct me if I say the creature is some other folklore creature, because it's just what it seems to be. This story happened around 2022 in the late summer. I was outside with my friend riding our bikes as we usually did. He mentioned to me a small forest where his friend had thrown a party a few days ago. It was around 20 minutes away from where we were, and we decided to go there together. At the time, it was 3 p.m., so we had all the time we needed, really. It was summer, after all. My friend, we'll call him Jay, and I went through the roads of the city and into a more rural part of the state I live in. Since there were no cars on the downhill road, he and I went as fast as we could. So instead of having to go for 20 minutes, we managed to get there in about 12. I was an adrenaline junkie back then, so the feeling of riding downhill on a bicycle at 50 kilometers an hour was a great experience for a kid like me. We stopped at a small opening by the road. It led to a tree-covered path. As soon as I started going down the path on my bike, I got this weird, eerie feeling from the place. Even though it was bright and sunny outside, the thick forest and leaves made it quite dark in the woods. Furthermore, I pushed through the weird feeling I got from the place, and as we got to the center of the forest, where a burnt-out campfire was, I jumped off my bike and put down my bag. Even though it was a particularly hot day, the forest felt cold and sent shivers down my spine. I then placed my bag on a small bench next to the campfire, pulling out a bottle of water and offering some to Jay. We started to play some music, chatting and showing each other memes, laughing and joking about things. I then showed Jay my knife that my cousin had given me for my birthday earlier in the year. He thought it was cool. As I was showing him the knife, we heard an ear-piercing scream from around the corner in a group of bushes and trees. Except something about the scream felt off. It felt off in a way, like something was trying to mimic a voice, trying to sound like a woman in pain, but not completely accurate. Jay and I exchanged terrified looks, eyes darting around afterwards. We put all our stuff back in our bags and jumped onto our bikes. We got the heck out of there. I swear, as we were leaving, though, I looked back, and there, behind a tree, I saw two white glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness of the forest. As soon as Jay and I hit the road, we rode away as if our lives were on the line, which they might as well have been. As soon as we made it into a more populated area, we finally slowed down to catch our breaths. Between panting breaths, I asked Jay, "Dude, what the heck was that? Did you also hear that?" He looked back at me, fear clear in his eyes, and nodded. He then verbally agreed. Now, I'm a guy who is really into paranormal stuff, and I believe the thing we encountered was a Skinwalker. Even after 2 years, I'm still terrified of going back there. I've been there once since the incident, and when I was there again, there was an old man. He had a huge old gash under his eye. We asked him if he knew about anything paranormal going around these parts, but he just shrugged, said he didn't know what we were talking about. Looking back at the situation I was in, I think if I would have acted a little later, I may not be here to tell the tale. Two stories from Medzie. The Candle Circle. I know the story I'm about to tell you is going to sound similar to what you might see in movies, but it really happened to me. This event made me realize some fictional movies have more truth to them than what you'd think. Back when I was around 16 or so, I was obsessed with the occult. Scary movies, unexplained footage, ghost hunting shows, you name it, and I've seen or heard of it. I had a friend with similar interests who enjoyed watching scary movies with me. One day, we were home alone after school at my house. We decided it would be fun to light a circle of candles and see if we could make contact with any spirits. We decided my room would be the best place because I only had one door and 2 windows that would need closed or covered. My room was on the 2nd floor, and he had to go through my little sister's room to get to mine. It was a bonus room built above the garage. We lit a large circle of small candles and sat in the middle. We held hands and chanted for the spirits to communicate with us while we recorded everything with our phones. For a while, nothing happened, and we just sat and stared at the candle lights. Suddenly, the candles began to flicker and move. At first, we tried to blame each other. We looked around, checking if the windows and doors were truly shut. We even went as far as blocking the slit under the door with towels before we began, so we knew there could not be any drafts. Suddenly, the candles blew completely sideways in a perfect circle around us. My friend thought it would be cool to ask questions and give the spirits directions on how to communicate with us. She said something like, "Move the candles to the left or right for yes or no." She asked if we were speaking to a man, and the candles flickered to the side that meant yes. She then asked if he was friendly, and the candles again flickered to the side that said yes. We began to have fun with it, asking a few more questions that were getting sillier by the minute. We were just a couple of teens messing around, after all. Suddenly, all the candles stopped moving, and nothing happened for a few minutes. As we were losing interest and about to stop the whole thing, we started to hear knocking coming from downstairs. Not someone knocking on the front door or anything consistent, but occasional knocking through the whole house every few seconds. It would have been impossible for someone to run around without us hearing them, knocking on the different places throughout the house. They started out faint but grew in intensity, until it sounded as if someone was hitting the walls with a baseball bat. We started to panic, and I yelled out for my parents, hoping it was just one of them. But no one answered me back. Then the house fell silent. We waited in fear, staring at each other. Just when I was about to say we should stop this, we heard loud, crashing steps coming up the stairs. Quickly, we blew the candles out and said the closing saying right before the person made it to the top of the steps. And as suddenly as everything had begun, the house fell silent again. I ran out of my room to the stairs to see if someone was there. But as you would expect from a story like this, the house was empty. I checked both floors and even the basement and garage, but nobody else was home. I even called my parents, but they both assured me that they were still at work. This whole ordeal lasted about 15 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. When we played the recordings back, you couldn't hear any knocking, but there were faint screams that we couldn't hear while they happened. You could also hear the stomping up the stairs on the recording. That was the first and last time I ever tried to communicate with spirits. Be careful who or what you call for, as you never know what will answer you. The voice of death. When I was 12 years old, my great-grandfather passed away. Being the patriarch of the family, many of my family members were devastated. It wasn't a sudden or unexpected death, but that didn't make it hurt any less. My great-grandparents were your typical Irish family. They had 12 kids and hundreds of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The day after my grampy passed, I decided to spend the night at my great-grandmother's house with my great-aunt Sarah and my first cousin Mark. When I arrived, I found my Nana at her seat at the end of the kitchen table, with her usual lit cigarette and cup of tea. It was about midnight by then, and I settled down at the table with her, Sarah, and Mark. My whole family consists of these night owls, so it wasn't uncommon for us to be up late into the night together. Around 2 a.m., it started to rain outside. The kitchen was surrounded by big glass windows and a sliding glass door. As we sat and reminisced about Grampy, the weather worsened quickly. Suddenly, there was a loud crack of thunder and a flash of lightning illuminating the entire house. Then the house was engulfed in darkness. The power had gone out. This wasn't unusual in our area during storms, as we lived on a man-made island of sorts. We were used to things breaking easily here and taking a while to be fixed. Everyone went about their conversations as if this was a normal incident. All of a sudden, something overcame me. I felt this rush of nausea and my face began to tingle and go numb. Abruptly, the world fell silent around me, and all I could hear was the voice in my ear. At first, it was a whisper that I strained to hear, but rapidly it grew louder, and I was able to clearly understand what it was saying to me.
Someone is dead.
My head rushed with thoughts. I mean, of course someone was dead. My grampy had just died the day before. I felt that if I didn't repeat what the voice was telling me, it would continue to weaken me. It was a weird feeling to not be in control of my body, but to still be fully conscious and aware of my surroundings. I was having an internal battle with myself, because as much as I somehow knew how to stop this, I didn't want to upset my Nana, who had been through enough pain already. Finally, after about 3 minutes and feeling like I was on the brink of losing consciousness, a loud bang erupted from outside. Everyone fell silent. I then blurted out, "Someone is dead." Everyone looked over to me, puzzled, and I repeated myself, "Someone is dead." My aunt, trying to defuse the situation, said someone probably just hit a pole and that's what that noise was. Not sure how that was supposed to lighten the mood, but I commend her effort at trying to deflect my crazy outburst. Immediately, after I said the words, my body instantly felt relief. It was as if a weight was lifted off my chest, and the nausea and faintness disappeared in an instant. Everyone decided it was best to go to bed now. By then it was just past 3 a.m. As I got ready to lie down, my cousin came to me very frightened. He was checking all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked, and was asking me more about why I said that. I explained what had happened to me, and how I knew the only way to make it stop was to say that aloud to everyone. He was nervous, to say the least, and we ended up each taking a couch in the living room to sleep for the night. The next day, many of my family came to visit. It was a blur of bodies trying to comfort and console each other. I was talking to my cousin M and his sister L when the phone rang. My Nana answered the phone, abruptly letting out the most devastating cry I've ever heard. She fell to the floor crying and yelling, "Don't you say that to me." Everyone was so confused and rushing to her side. Being only 12 years old, I was ushered into the living room as the adults tried to shelter us from the situation. But there were no doors in the room, so I could clearly hear the commotion in the kitchen right next to us. Elle snuck into the kitchen to investigate, coming back a few minutes later. As she came up to M and me, my mother had just walked over to our group, asking what had happened, as she had just gotten here. Without skipping a beat, my cousin L said that our other cousin A had committed suicide in the early hours of the morning, and everyone, including my Nana, had just found out. At this point, I had completely forgotten about the night before, surprisingly, but my cousin M certainly had not. His eyes looked like they were going to fall out of his head. He looked at all of us and said, "You told us last night that this had happened." Suddenly, he spewed the events of the past night to my mother and cousin, and kept saying, "She's psychic! She's a psychic!" To this day, he still says that. It's a story he seems to love to reminisce about almost every time we're together. I don't know if I'm psychic. I've had many other weird things happen to me. But that night it was this voice that started in my ear, then took over my body, that warned us. I'm not sure if this was my grampy trying to warn us, or something more sinister at play. Either way, it has happened to me one other time when I was 14, but not since. It was a scary experience for me. But both times, as soon as I spoke the words I was hearing aloud, which were basically me saying that death was coming, the events stopped immediately. I've done a lot of research, and I'm torn between psychic empathy episodes, some type of possession, or maybe just a ghostly warning. Any ideas aren't greatly appreciated. Stay safe, everyone, and be careful of the voice of death. An Idaho Werewolf Encounter. From Sumthinkin. I spent the summer of 2010 in a little slice of Idaho wilderness that most people will never visit or even know exists. My uncle owns an old privately leased hunting cabin near the edges of the Boise National Forest, about a 2-hour drive from any big city. We're talking a long gravel road and no cell phone reception, for the most part, and dense clusters of pines and Douglas fir that seem to swallow every sound except the wind. I was 19 years old, helping my uncle out by doing some light repairs, stocking firewood, making sure the place would be livable for the upcoming hunting season. That cabin was worn. It had no electricity except for a gas generator. It had a water pump out back and squeaky floorboards that never let you forget you were alone out there. It was mid-June, and although some days were pleasantly warm, the nights got cold and eerily quiet. It wasn't my first time out in the woods. I'd grown up in Idaho and loved outdoor adventures, but I'd never stayed someplace so utterly remote before, alone for that matter, for weeks at a time. Still, I welcomed the solitude, figuring I could catch up on some reading and maybe do some fishing in the nearby creek. My uncle had taught me a few basics to keep myself safe. How to bear-proof the trash, keep an eye out for cougars, be mindful that sometimes, especially at dusk, you can sense animals before you ever see them. I was about a week into my stay when I noticed the first weird thing. Footprints. Not the usual elk or deer tracks, which were abundant around those parts, but something that looked canine, only it was spectacularly too large. Like a big dog had stepped through the mud, and I mean the biggest dog you've ever seen. More odd yet was the placement. Normally, animal tracks followed some sort of pattern, but these seemed spaced out, like something had been walking upright. A distinct line of them led from the tree line toward the cabin's back door, then disappeared into the pine needles. They were faint, now partially dried in the sun, but there was enough left to make me do a double take. I'm no expert tracker, but I've spent enough time outdoors to recognize an unusual trail. I brushed it off, thinking maybe a stray dog had been sniffing around. We did sometimes get hunters' dogs wandering close by if they got off leash, but upright? Maybe it was hopping or limping or something. I forced myself to forget about it, but a tickle of doubt remained in the back of my mind. That night I was sitting on the old rickety porch, reading by the last streaks of daylight. The porch faced a clearing that stretched about 50 yards before the real thick forest began. No road lights, no neighbors, just the hush of the wind through the pines. That was when I heard a rustling sound from somewhere out in the clearing. Could have been a deer, maybe the wind. But then came a single low growl, so quiet I almost believed I'd imagined it. I froze, straining my ears. Nothing else, just the hiss of the breeze. Then the cicadas kicked up, singing in that way that always feels like they're drowning out something more important. I told myself I was spooking over nothing, and went inside. But I made sure to bolt the door, something I hadn't bothered doing before. Over the next few days, I started to see other signs. I'd occasionally find strange scratches near the cabin's baseboards on the outside walls, long, thin gouges that didn't look like random animal claw marks. They were too close together, almost parallel. One evening, about an hour after dark, I had the generator running so I could heat up some soup on the electric hot plate. I then heard a hard thump on one of the porch posts. Grabbing a flashlight, I peeked outside through a side window, thinking I was about to see a bear rummaging around. Instead, I caught a glimpse of something tall, a canine shape silhouetted against the moonlit clearing. It was there for a split second, Then it shot off into the darkness, too fast for me to even process. My heart skipped a beat and I quickly shut off the porch light, killing the generator. I stayed crouched by the window, listening for movement. I don't scare easily, but the shape I saw was just too large to be a typical wolf or coyote, and that sense of it moving on two legs clung to my mind. Still, I tried to make sense of it. A tall wolf on its hind legs, maybe, but why? Sure, they can stand or hop around for short bursts, but not like a human, and they would need a good reason to do that. It made no sense. I slept that night with a loaded shotgun next to me, though I barely got any sleep. A few days later, I drove into the nearest town to pick up more supplies and to call my uncle from the payphone at the only gas station. He told me not to worry. He said I was probably seeing a black bear or a large dog. He reminded me to keep the doors locked and the trash sealed. I didn't mention the footprints or the standing part, because I knew he'd scoff at that. Reluctantly, I headed back to the cabin, deciding I'd give it another week before bailing out. I was starting to feel on edge at all hours, like something was watching me through the trees. On my second evening back, the air turned unusually still. There was no breeze and no animal noises, just this thick silence. I wandered out to the porch with my flashlight, scanning the clearing. Nothing. Then, from behind me, I heard a scraping sound against the wood panels of the cabin. My blood turned cold. I spun around, shining the flashlight across the front wall. That's when I saw it. Its silhouette. About 7 feet tall, hunched, with a head like a German shepherd or a wolf, muzzle elongated, ears perked up. Even in the poor light, I could see the rough fur on its back. 2 eyes glowed, reflecting the flashlight's beam with a pale, sickly greenish-yellow shine. It had a wide chest, and the arms were more like that of a man than any animal. They were pinned at its sides as it pressed up against the cabin wall. Its claws were long, curved, and resting against the wood. I froze. I swear I could feel its gaze, like a physical thing. Time seemed to slow down, and my heart pounded so violently, I thought I might pass out. The creature's lip curled, revealing fangs. Without thinking, I took a step back slowly, the boards under my boot squeaking. Its ears twitched at the sound. Then, in a motion almost too quick to register, it dropped onto all fours and bolted away from the porch, clearing the steps in a single leap. I heard a heavy thud as it landed on the ground. Then it loped into the dark, disappearing into the tree line. I was left standing there, shotgun forgotten inside, my flashlight shaking so badly the beam was jumping around. It felt like a long time before I could even breathe normally. I rushed inside, locking the door. I even slid a heavy table in front of it. I then grabbed my gun. I stayed up the rest of the night with every light on, the generator whining in the background. Every so often, I heard distant snapping twigs, the faintest howls, but nothing came back to the porch. Morning brought relief. With the sun out, I went outside with the gun to inspect the cabin's exterior. Sure enough, there were fresh scratch marks where I'd seen the creature. The tracks around the porch were a confusing mix of paw prints and something that looked more humanoid. The front paws or maybe feet had a different shape, as if the creature could switch between standing upright and dropping to all fours naturally and easily. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, just looking at those prints. I didn't want to stay another minute, but I did need to gather my stuff, secure the cabin, and hope I never had to come back alone. Still, I told myself it might have just been a big wolf. It was suffering from mange or some other condition, even though I knew that couldn't account for how it stood on 2 legs with such ease. My rational side flailed for any explanation. But in my gut, I knew I had encountered something beyond the ordinary wildlife of Idaho. I waited until midday, when the sun was high, to hurry and pack my gear. I made several runs to the truck, occasionally spinning around to check the forest line. At one point I heard the crunching of leaves, and my eyes landed on a shape crouched among the thick pines, nearly blending in with the dark. It was about 100 yards away, just watching me. Though it was too dark to see details, I recognized that canine silhouette. My heart seemed to stop, but I kept myself moving, refusing to appear panicked. Maybe it respected that I was leaving, like I was no longer a threat or even a curiosity. It didn't charge or try to stop me. I tossed the last bag into the truck, jumped in, and peeled out down the gravel road. My uncle was upset that I left early, but after hearing the tremor in my voice when I tried to explain, he didn't push me too hard. I never quite told him the full story. I said it was a big wolf or a strange bear that put me on edge. He's teased me about it over the years, but I know what I saw. I think about it sometimes, how large and unnaturally human those movements were, the intelligence behind its eyes. There was no sense of aimless wild aggression. It felt calculating, observant, like it was deciding whether or not to do something to me. The cabin is still in our family, though I've refused to return there alone ever since. A few other relatives have stayed up there, mostly in groups. One cousin of mine even joked, "Did you see the werewolf yet?" Though we all chuckled, I noticed my uncle's face stiffen a bit, as if he wasn't entirely sure my story was a joke. Sometimes at holiday gatherings, he'll tell folks, he swears he saw some sort of monster. Everyone laughs, but I smile tightly and think, if only you actually knew. That's my story. People can believe it or not, but I will tell you this. If you ever wander deep into the wilderness near the Boise National Forest and hear a low growl or see a hulking shadow among the pines, you might want to think twice before staying the night. The dog man, or whatever it is, could be out there, keeping a good eye on you. If it decides to step into your light, you won't forget it, because I haven't. The House Behind the School Grounds. From Ariel 543. When I was in the 5th grade, I went to school in a small town in Montana over in the plains. I have since moved across the state, but I still hate thinking back on it. At the time, I was friends with 2 girls named Hallie and Bella. I haven't seen them since I moved, as they were not great people. One day, Bella's older brother and his friend went to an abandoned house on the school grounds. For context, Bella and her brother lived behind the school, only about 30 yards away from this house. When they went inside, they found pictures of a little boy around the house and normal household items, but everything was covered in dust. The 2 boys saw a check on a table, and when Bella's brother tried to grab it, he felt a pain on his back. Later, they found scratch marks on his back. They decided to keep looking around and found a hole in the roof that led to the attic. Something was looking down at them from there. I never got a description of what it was, and I'm glad I didn't. The next day, Bella told me and Hallie about her brother's experience, and the 3 of us decided to check it out ourselves. I remember it was a Thursday. We didn't have school the next day, so that's when we went to the house. The boys followed us there and told us they had locked the doors, though we later learned they never did. We didn't immediately go inside, not just because they told us not to. We wanted to walk around the house first, so the boys wouldn't see us enter after they left. We started at the front door and began walking to the other side. At the corner, there was a piece of wire fence and a wooden wheel leaning against the wall. We stopped to look at the wheel, but then we heard something big moving inside on the second floor. I guess the walls of the place were quite thin. We all ran into a patch of grass between Bella's house, the school, and the abandoned house, though we could still see it clearly. Once we were at a safe distance, we looked back and saw the shape of a head watching us through the open window. We couldn't see any details, just the shape. As we started to walk back toward the school where our moms were going to pick us up, we looked at the house again. The head was gone, but in a different window that was boarded up, we saw a white hand sticking out. It looked like it was both waving and trying to escape at the same time. We ran again until we reached the student parking lot. Strangely, we found a line of hair ties spaced 4 to 5 feet apart, stopping at the beginning of the sidewalk against the school. We weren't sure if this was related to what just happened, as they hadn't been there before, or if it was just a student being silly. Our school was K through 12. Later that month, weird things started to happen. One day at school, Bella heard something big walking on the school roof while she was in the bathroom. Later that day, it looked like something had kicked a thin border decoration off the roof, as it was now hanging off. Bella also heard a door open in her house when she was home alone. I never felt unwatched in my home anymore. I have one more short story. A couple of months before or after that event, I can't remember which, my sister, mother, and I were sleeping in my mom's room with our 2 Cocker Spaniels. My grandmother was asleep in her room. I was the only one awake besides the cats and dogs. I heard footsteps in the kitchen, but they were too light to be my grandmother's. The cats never came downstairs. We didn't have my current cat yet, and both dogs were in the room with us. I woke my mother up and told her, and she said, "It's just the dogs. Go to sleep," before going back to sleep herself. I personally think it was my great-grandmother. She had died in that very house a couple of years ago. I wonder if she was the presence I felt watching me too. Sadly, we had to leave that house shortly afterward, so that town was not good for us. It is no longer in the family, but to this day, paranormal activity seems to follow me. Weird noises in the country when I visit my father, my crush's mother getting dragged out of her bed by her hair by something unseen, and much more. So if you're in a small town and you start to hear rumors, believe them. It's always nice when my favorite monster makes an appearance or two. Werewolves and dogmen, that is. Heck, maybe they're different creatures, but they're similar enough to give me the willies. That brings us to the end of this episode of Unexplained Encounters. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, it's January 1st, 2025. Happy New Year. Let's make 2025 the year of plentiful fears and fewer failures. Thanks for listening to Unexplained Encounters into yet another new year. I'm Darkness Prevails. You should follow me on X at Dark Prevails to see my hottest takes, like my love for dairy and my fear of looking up. Help us keep Unexplained Encounters afloat by following and reviewing us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Better yet, get exclusive members-only content and remove all ads by signing up for eriecast.com/plus. If you want some new merch, head on over to eriecast.store. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.